My cousins attempted to seize control of the family business, but I stood my ground and refused to let them overpower me. I took decisive action and defeated them. It all began with my grandfather Walter, who started the business as a modest woodworking shop, crafting handmade furniture and selling it to neighbors. Over time, his dedication to quality built a reputation for craftsmanship, and the small shop grew into Walter's Creations, a flourishing, high-end furniture empire. Walter always emphasized that this wasn't just a business. It was a legacy for all of us to inherit and expand together. For years, I believed in that vision, but everything began to change when Walter stepped back. Though he still came to the office a few days each week, most major decisions were now left to us, the younger generation. I never thought Jordan, Cassidy, and Blake, my cousins, would betray me, but they did. It started subtly at first. I'd walk into meetings only to discover that decisions had already been made without me. Oh, Alex, we didn't want to bother you with the smaller details, Jordan said once, flashing a polished, rehearsed smile. Initially, I brushed it off. I wasn't the type to stir up conflict, but when it kept happening, affecting key meetings, financial updates, and marketing campaigns, I started to feel uneasy. One Friday, I overheard Cassidy and Blake talking quietly near the break room. "We just need to get the paperwork finalized," Cassidy said. When they noticed me, they fell silent and plastered on forced smiles. "Oh, hey, Alex," Cassidy chirped a bit too brightly. It was clear that something suspicious was going on. The real tipping point came at a family dinner at Walter's house, a tradition he maintained monthly to keep everyone close. That evening, the atmosphere felt off. Jordan, Cassidy, and Blake arrived early, laughing and whispering among themselves as though they owned the place. My younger sister Sophia, who was still in college but had an eye for tension, noticed their behavior too. "What's their deal?" she muttered while we set the table. "They're acting like they're planning a takeover or something." I laughed it off, trying to dismiss the thought, but it lingered in the back of my mind. During dinner, Jordan steered the conversation toward the future of the company. "Grandpa, you've done an incredible job building the business," he said, his voice dripping with charm. "But it's time for us to modernize things. Alex is good with the old ways, sure, but we need fresh ideas." Walter frowned at the comment. "Alex has been working there since he was 16. He knows the business as well as I do," he said firmly. Jordan offered a tight smile. "Of course, Grandpa. I'm just saying we should all have a say in the direction we're taking." Sophia nudged me under the table, her expression silently warning me to watch out. That night I couldn't sleep. Their behavior kept replaying in my mind, gnawing at me. I decided to dig deeper, starting with the business records. Since I managed most of the finances, I had access to all the relevant information. It didn't take long to find something suspicious. A series of meetings scheduled with a law firm I'd never heard of, booked by Jordan. The next morning, I confronted him directly at the office. "What's this about? Why are you meeting with lawyers without informing me?" I demanded. Jordan didn't even flinch. "Relax, Alex. It's nothing shady. Just exploring some restructuring options to streamline things." "Streamline?" I echoed. "You mean cutting me out?" Jordan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're paranoid. No one's cutting you out. But let's be honest, not everyone can lead. Someone has to step up." His words hit me like a slap. Walter's vision was for all of us to lead together, but Jordan shrugged it off. "Visions change," he said dismissively. I realized then that I couldn't handle this alone. That evening, I called my best friend Mason, who had been my confidant since high school and understood the family dynamics well. Pacing my living room, I laid everything out for him. "They're trying to push me out," I said, fists clenched. Mason leaned back on the couch, his expression serious. "You're not wrong, but you need solid proof. Without that, it's just your word against theirs." That was the challenge. Jordan was slick, and Cassidy and Blake followed him like loyal henchmen. If I confronted them outright, they'd deny everything. I needed a plan. Mason suggested I start by digging into their meetings, pointing out that there had to be a paper trail or Mills' contracts or something similar. It was a solid idea, but I had no clue how deep their plotting went. Over the next week, I kept close tabs on everything. One day, Marcus, a longtime employee who had worked with Walter from the early days, noticed my tension. "You okay, Alex?" he asked. Marcus was observant and trustworthy, a quiet type who saw everything but rarely spoke. Hesitant, I decided to test the waters. "Have you noticed anything unusual with Jordan, Cassidy, and Blake?" I asked. Marcus gave me a knowing look. "They've been meeting behind closed doors a lot lately, poking around in areas like legal and accounting. It doesn't seem right." That confirmation was all I needed. My cousins weren't just sidelining me. They were planning something far bigger. If I didn't act quickly, I risked losing everything. Determined not to let that happen, I began combing through emails, financial records, and any documents I could access. But they were meticulous. There was no obvious trail. "I think I've found something," he said, his voice low. "Remember Dylan, Jordan's college friend?" I frowned, recalling Dylan as a charismatic troublemaker. "What about him?" I asked. "He's been spending time with the company's lawyer." Mason told me he saw Cassidy leaving a restaurant with Dylan and another man in a suit the previous day, and it looked like a business meeting rather than something casual. The blood drained from my face. "Are you sure?" I asked. 100%, he replied. I even snapped a picture just in case. Mason sent me the photo, and there it was. Dylan seated across from Cassidy and a man I recognized as one of the lawyers from Jordan's mysterious meetings. My stomach turned. Dylan wasn't just hanging around. He was actively involved. Not long after, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Later that week, a client called me, upset about a delay in their order. Normally, I'd be the first to hear about any supply chain problems, but this was news to me. When I checked the logs, I found a series of last-minute adjustments to the production schedule, changes made by Cassidy. She had rerouted resources to prioritize a project I didn't even know existed. The next morning, I confronted her in the office. "What's this about?" I demanded, holding up the logs. Cassidy looked up from her desk, her expression carefully composed. "It's just a shift in priorities, Alex. Nothing to get upset over," she said. "A shift in priorities without consulting me? We're supposed to make these decisions together," I snapped. She shrugged. "Jordan thought it was better to move quickly. We didn't want to waste time." I slammed the papers onto her desk, frustration boiling over. "You didn't want to waste time, or you didn't want me involved." Her mask slipped for a moment, revealing something cold and calculating in her eyes. "You're overreacting," she said smoothly. "We're just trying to do what's best for the company." In that moment, it hit me. They weren't just undermining me. They were systematically working to edge me out. This wasn't them waiting for me to fail. They were actively setting me up to look incompetent. And it wasn't just about control, this was personal. As soon as I got home, I called Mason. "They're cutting me out of everything," I said, pacing my living room. "Production schedules, client relations, even financial decisions. If I don't stop them, they'll destroy my reputation before I even know what hit me." Mason was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "What's their end game? Do you think they're planning to take over completely?" I sighed. "I don't think—" "I know, and they're not doing it alone. Dylan's involved, and who knows who else." Mason's voice turned serious. "Then you need to figure out exactly what they're planning. If you can prove they're working behind your back, you'll have leverage." That night, I decided to go straight to the source. Jordan had been acting as though he already owned the company, so it wasn't hard to guess where he might keep critical files. I waited until the office was empty, then slipped into his corner office, a knot of dread forming in my stomach. At first, I found nothing unusual, just contracts and project proposals, but then I stumbled upon a folder labeled Restructure Plans. My hands shook as I opened it, and what I saw made my blood boil. The folder contained a detailed proposal to overhaul the company's leadership, effectively reducing my role to a figurehead while Jordan assumed the position of CEO. Cassidy and Blake were each slated to receive significant shares of the company, leaving me with a fraction of the ownership I had spent years working to maintain. But the worst part was a draft letter to Walter, urging him to approve the changes. The letter was filled with lies, painting me as someone with no vision or leadership ability. Their plan was to manipulate Walter into giving them control while framing me as the problem. The next day, I decided it was time to confront them. I waited until we were all in the same room, Jordan, Cassidy, Blake, and me. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. Jordan raised an eyebrow. "About what?" he asked. I pulled out my phone and opened the photos I'd taken. "About this." Cassidy went pale, but Jordan quickly regained his composure. "You've been snooping through my files?" he asked sharply. "That's a violation of company policy, Alex." "Don't try to twist this on me," I snapped. "You're the ones breaking every principle this company was built on. You're trying to cut me out, and you're lying to Grandpa to do it." Blake shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but Jordan held his ground. "You don't understand what's at stake," he said. "We're trying to protect the company from your short-sightedness." I stared at him, incredulous. "Short-sightedness?" Kindness and compassion toward others may be found in a person's short-sightedness, and Performance Victoria accompanied by mild and troubled-time skin. Finally, Cassidy spoke, her voice trembling. "It's not personal, Alex. We just think the company needs a new direction." I scoffed. "Not personal. You're stealing everything I worked for and calling it a new direction." Jordan stood, his expression hard. "If you're not with us, you're against us. And trust me, Alex, you don't want to be against us." I had photos of the restructuring plans, but I needed more evidence to expose their scheme completely. Luckily, I wasn't alone. Mason and Marcus were ready to help. That evening, I called Clara, who wasn't family but had worked closely with Walter for years as a consultant. Clara was sharp, resourceful, and had a knack for uncovering hidden details. If anyone could help me figure out the full extent of my cousin's plan, it was her. "Alex," she said after I explained everything, her voice calm but firm, "this is worse than I thought. If they've already drafted letters to Walter, they're moving faster than you realize." I nodded, pacing the room. "I know. They've been meeting with lawyers and outsiders. Mason saw Dylan with Cassidy, and I'm certain he's part of this too." Clara was silent for a moment. Then she said, "You need to hit them where it hurts. The board." "The board?" I echoed. "What do you mean?" Clara explained that while Walter had always maintained control of the company, a board of advisors had been created years ago to oversee major decisions. "If you can get the board on your side," she said, "you'll have a chance to stop Jordan's power grab." "But the board doesn't know about this," I said. "They're in the dark, just like Walter." Clara's tone sharpened. "Exactly. That's your leverage. If you can show them proof of what Jordan and the others are doing, you can force a meeting and make your case." It was a solid plan, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. The board wasn't a group of neutral observers. Some had connections to my cousins, while others might be hesitant to take sides. Still, it was my best shot. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Marcus, with his deep understanding of the company's operations, assisted me in sifting through financial records and employee logs. Together we uncovered further evidence of unethical activity, tampered contracts, unauthorized expenditures, and even irregularities in payroll. It was becoming increasingly clear that Jordan and Cassidy had been discreetly redirecting company resources for personal gain. Meanwhile, Mason monitored Dylan and Brianna, who seemed to act as enforcers on their behalf. "Dylan's been calling suppliers," Mason informed me one evening. "He's trying to renegotiate contracts behind your back." It felt like battling a hydra. Every time one scheme was uncovered, another emerged. But the most shocking discovery came from Marcus. He stumbled upon a series of emails between Cassidy and an unidentified buyer discussing the sale of a large portion of the company. My heart sank as I read the messages. They weren't just planning a takeover, they were preparing to sell off sections of the business. This wasn't about upholding Walter's legacy, it was about enriching themselves. Armed with this new information, I knew I had to confront Walter before it was too late. That evening, I went to his house, my nerves in knots. Walter greeted me warmly, though there was a trace of worry in his expression. "Alex," he said, ushering me inside, "what's this about? You look like you've seen a ghost." "It's worse than that," I replied, handing him the photos and documents I had gathered. "You need to see this." Walter sat down and began reading. With every page his expression darkened. By the time he finished, he looked enraged. "I can't believe this," he said, shaking his head. "Jordan, Cassidy, Blake, they're my own grandchildren. How could they do this?" "They don't care about the legacy," I said. "They care about control. And if we don't stop them, they'll sell off everything you built." Walter leaned back, rubbing his temples. "This is a nightmare," he muttered. "But you've done the right thing, Alex. We need to act fast." The next morning, Walter called an emergency board meeting. Jordan, Cassidy, and Blake arrived, looking confident, clearly expecting to cement their control. However, their smugness vanished when they saw Walter and me seated at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming," Walter began, his tone steady yet firm. "I've called this meeting to address some deeply troubling developments." Jordan leaned back, trying to appear unaffected. "What kind of developments?" he asked. Walter gestured toward me, and I stood, my hands slightly trembling as I began presenting the evidence. I laid out the photos, emails, and financial records, explaining how my cousins had conspired to seize control of the company and sell off assets. The board members exchanged stunned glances, whispering among themselves. Casilda tried to interrupt. "This is a misunderstanding," she began. "No, it's not," I shot back. "You've been lying to all of us, manipulating Grandpa and jeopardizing the company's future. And I have the proof to back it up." For the first time, Jordan's confident facade cracked. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" he hissed. "This isn't over, Alex." Walter slammed his hand on the table, silencing him. "Yes, it is," he said firmly. "I trusted all of you to work together for the good of this family, but you've betrayed that trust." The board voted unanimously to suspend Jordan, Cassidy, and Blake from their positions, pending a full investigation. It was a victory, but I knew the battle wasn't over. My cousins wouldn't surrender easily. As the meeting ended, Clara pulled me aside. "You handled that well," she said, "but be cautious. They won't stop here." I nodded. "I know," I replied, "but neither will I." Jordan, Cassidy, and Blake might have been temporarily sidelined, but I could feel the weight of their glares as they left the boardroom. Walter reassured me that we had done the right thing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my cousins were already plotting their next move. True to form, it didn't take long for them to strike back. Just 2 days later, one of our largest suppliers abruptly backed out of a contract renewal. I only found out because Mason overheard Dylan bragging at a bar about pulling some strings. Before I could respond, Brianna, one of Cassidy's allies, started spreading rumors among employees about alleged financial instability in the company. By the week's end, morale was crumbling, and clients were beginning to ask questions. It was a coordinated effort designed to make me appear incapable of handling the pressure, but I wasn't about to let them win. While Marcus worked to manage the fallout, Clara helped me gather more evidence. She had been digging into Dylan and Brianna's connections and discovered something startling. Dylan had ties to a rival company. If my cousins were working with him, they weren't just undermining me. They were sabotaging the family business itself. With this new information, I decided it was time to strike back. Late into the night, I pored over contracts and financial documents, searching for a way to turn the tide. That's when I found it. A clause in the company bylaws allowing for an emergency vote of no confidence if any shareholder was proven to be acting against the company's interests. This wasn't just about suspending them anymore. I could strip them of their shares entirely. I presented the idea to Walter the next morning. At first he hesitated, concerned about the repercussions, but after some thought he nodded. "If they're willing to destroy everything I've built," he said, "then they've left us no choice." The next challenge was convincing the board. It wasn't easy. Some members had personal loyalties to Jordan, while others were wary of such a drastic move. But as I presented evidence showing how their actions had already cost us a major contract and damaged our reputation, the mood shifted. By the time I finished, most of the board seemed to be on my side. Then came the second blow. Just as the board was about to vote, we received notice of a legal action. Jordan and Cassidy had filed an injunction, accusing me of fabricating evidence and defaming them. It was a blatant stalling tactic, but it worked. The vote was postponed, and I suddenly found myself in a legal battle. Mason, ever the strategist, saw this as an opportunity. "If they're dragging this into court," he said, "we can use discovery to dig deeper into their dealings. They've been careful, but nobody's perfect. If we keep the pressure on, they'll slip." Clara agreed, and with her help, we started building a case. She unearthed more emails connecting Dylan to the rival company, while Marcus uncovered suspense reports tied to a shell corporation. The puzzle pieces were starting to fall into place. But we needed something irrefutable, evidence that would leave no doubt about their intentions. That's when Clara revealed a major breakthrough. She had tracked down a former associate of Dylan, someone who had worked for the rival company and left on bad terms. This individual was willing to share what they knew. According to them, Dylan had been feeding details about our supply chain to his superiors for months, all with Cassidy's approval. Even better, they had proof, emails, text messages, and even an audio recording of a meeting where Cassidy and Jordan explicitly discussed their plans to sabotage the business. It was the undeniable evidence we needed. With Walter's support, I convened an emergency board meeting to present this new information. This time there was no hesitation from the board. They unanimously voted to revoke Jordan, Cassidy, and Blake's shares and permanently remove them from the company. There was a decisive victory, but it didn't feel final. Jordan made that clear when he confronted me in the parking lot after the meeting. "You think this is over?" he said, his tone venomous and low. "You may have the company, but you'll never have control. We'll make sure of that." I didn't respond. There was no need. His threats were hollow, and we both knew it. Yet, as he walked away, I couldn't shake the unease that he still had one last move up his sleeve. That suspicion was confirmed later that evening when Clara called, her voice tense. "We've got a problem," she said. "I've been monitoring Dylan, and it looks like he's setting something big in motion. He's been on the phone all evening, rallying support for what seems like a hostile takeover." My heart sank. "How's that even possible? They don't have the shares anymore." "They don't. They haven't scaled back on deposit fee. They've increased 250% in the past 3 months. Is what has happened to the stock given the market downturn?" Clara replied, "But if they can buy enough support from other stakeholders, they might still force their way back in." It was a long shot, but it was just crazy enough to work. I knew I couldn't let my guard down. The following days were some of the most intense of my life. With Jordan, Cassidy, and Blake officially ousted and stripped of their shares, I had taken full leadership of the family business. But the threat of a hostile takeover loomed over every decision I made. Dillon and his allies moved quickly, spreading rumors and calling in favors to destabilize the company. It was clear they weren't merely seeking revenge. They were prepared to destroy the entire legacy if they couldn't control it. Clara remained by my side, diligently tracking Dillon's movements. "He's desperate," she told me one evening. "He's trying to convince smaller stakeholders to sell their shares, offering them far above market value. If he secures enough of them, he could still push for a vote." The prospect was terrifying, but it also sparked an idea. If Dillon was targeting minor stakeholders, I needed to get to them first. For the next few days, I met with every stakeholder I could. I explained the situation and emphasized the importance of keeping the company within the family. Some were sympathetic and supportive, while others were more reluctant, but I refused to back down. Every share I secured was another step toward protecting Walter's legacy. Meanwhile, Marcus uncovered a crucial lead. One of Dillon's key allies, a man named Grant, who owned a significant number of shares, had a history of financial troubles. If I could convince Grant that aligning with Dillon was too risky, it could tip the balance in my favor. With Marcus's help, I arranged a meeting with Grant at a neutral location. The meeting was tense. Grant was guarded and hesitant to involve himself in the conflict, but as I laid out the evidence of Dillon's manipulative tactics and the damage he had already caused, I noticed Grant's resolve begin to waver. "Do you really think Dillon can pull this off?" Grant asked, sounding skeptical. "I think he'll ruin everything trying," I replied. "If you side with him, you're betting against the company, against everything Walter built. Is that a risk you're willing to take?" Grant didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, it was clear I had reached him. "I'll think about it," he said before leaving. It wasn't the firm commitment I had hoped for, but it was progress. That evening, Clara called with an urgent update. "Dillon's making his move," she said. "He's called for an emergency stakeholder meeting tomorrow. If he gets enough support, he'll push for a vote of no confidence in your leadership." The timing couldn't have been worse. The company was still reeling from the recent upheaval, and a public confrontation could further damage our reputation. But there was no avoiding it. If Dillon wanted a fight, I was ready. The meeting was held in the company's main conference room, packed with stakeholders and board members. Dillon and Brianna sat at one end of the table, looking smug, while I took my place at the opposite end with Walter beside me. A silent but powerful show of support. Dillon wasted no time launching into his argument. "This company has been in decline ever since Alex took over," he declared, his tone confident and commanding. "We've lost contracts, client trust is eroding, and internal chaos is rampant. It's clear he's not fit to lead. We need new management, and I'm prepared to step in and restore stability." There were murmurs of agreement from a few stakeholders, and for a moment doubt crept in. But then Clara gave me a subtle signal from the back of the room, reminding me it was my turn to respond. I stood, taking a steadying breath before speaking. "Dillon talks a big game," I began, my tone calm but firm. But let's be clear, he's the one responsible for the lost contracts, the internal instability, and the lies spreading through this company. He's been sabotaging operations and trying to buy his way into power, and I have the proof to back it up. I presented the evidence Clara and Marcus had painstakingly gathered, emails, financial records, and recordings that tied Dillon to the sabotage. The room grew increasingly quiet as the weight of the evidence sank in. Even some of Dillon's staunchest allies started to look uneasy. Dillon tried to regain control. "This is nothing but a smear campaign," he shouted, his voice rising. "Alex is trying to cover up his own failures." That's when Walter stepped in, his voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Enough," he said, his tone resolute. "I've seen the damage you've caused, Dillon. You've betrayed this company and this family. You have no place here." The aftermath was bittersweet. Jordan, Cassidy, and Blake were gone, but their betrayal had left scars deeper than I wanted to acknowledge. Walter and I focused on stabilizing the company. working tirelessly to rebuild trust with both employees and clients. Clara stayed on as a consultant, her keen insights proving to be a vital asset as we tackled the challenges that lay ahead. One evening, as I was wrapping up for the day, Clara approached my desk. "You did well, Alex," she said, a rare smile lighting up her face. "Your grandfather would be proud." I returned her smile, feeling a burden lift from my shoulders. "Thanks, Clara. I couldn't have done it without you." She hesitated for a moment before adding, "There's one more thing you need to know." I frowned. "What is it?" Clara handed me a folder. Inside was a photo of an unfamiliar man alongside a series of cryptic emails. "Dylan wasn't acting on his own," she explained. "Someone else has been orchestrating everything from behind the scenes." My heart sank. "Who is he?" I asked, gesturing to the picture. Clara sighed. "He's been keeping a low profile, but I'm certain he's the true mastermind behind this entire scheme. You might have won the battle, Alex, but the war isn't over." As I stared at the photo, a chill crept down my spine. The fight to protect Walter's legacy wasn't finished, not yet, but this time I would be prepared for whatever came next.